The city of Lost Heaven seems like a place you'd escape to or escape from. Lost Heaven is a place of opportunity, a place where your choices can impact your life. Illusion Softworks used this virtual world as a backdrop to its story of choice and conflict, throwing cab driver Tommy Angelo right into the mysterious world of the American Mafia. Just before its successor Hangar 13 tries to do the same thing with a definitive remake, let's explore how Illusion Softworks made the first Mafia game possible and how important it may actually be to narrative storytelling in open world games. Five years into its lifetime, Illusion Softworks would release Mafia, the City of Lost Heaven on PC through publisher Gathering of Developers in the summer of 2002. It would later be ported to consoles in 2004. The initial Mafia development team at Illusion was only comprised of about 5 people, but eventually it would expand and grow to about 40 staff members. Originally conceptualized as Gangster, the game would have protagonist Tommy Angelo play as a policeman before turning into the taxi man, made man we all know now. Not much else is known about the early story development of Mafia, but it's safe to say that both scenarios would involve a lot of choice. Speaking of choice, you do have 3 different versions of Mafia to play, and while I'd normally kind of make a comparison between them to determine which version is best, the PC version is probably your best bet. It's not difficult to get mods, and you can upscale the graphics and resolution pretty easily. The console obviously lacks these options and even has some annoying load times between areas of the city. I should also mention that the game has had a few issues with PC releases. Obviously, it was first released physically on PC in 2002, then it would be added to Steam after the platform launched. It was dropped from Steam in 2012 due to licensing issues, then it was re-added to GOG in 2017 after working that out, and then eventually it would make its way back to Steam. Unfortunately, none of the licensed music is in the 2017 re-release, but it's not exactly hard to mod back in. Long story short, get the PC version unless you get the console version super cheap or you're really into racing cars in Grand Prix mode, in which case I would just tell you to play an actual racing game. Let's move on to the story of Mafia 1. Although our hero, Tommy Angelo, gets thrown into becoming a Mafia associate after a very frightful cab fare, he's still presented with a lot of choices. He may not agree with all of them, but he makes these choices in order to belong to this community of men. The game presents itself through Tommy retelling the story over a period of years between 1930 and 1938. As Lost Heaven expands, so too does the Mafia's influence on Tommy's decisions. It makes for an interesting ride and definitely not an attack. I'm glad we only had one mission where we had to do that. Unlike most open-ended action games, the Mafia series is more known for telling a linear story with some side gameplay tacked on. Eventually, you'll see this loosen up with Mafia 2 having more areas to explore, and Mafia 3 turning into a GTA-esque clone. For City of Lost Heaven, you're essentially playing through missions to drive the story forward without much deviance. The game gets split into different years, with cutscenes called intermezzos, breaking up the gameplay to explain how Tommy changed from year to year. It keeps things moving, but I find you do lose a bit of on-screen character development that gets thrown into a simple summary or short comment from Tommy. It's almost like you cram the Godfather trilogy into one long movie. You get the gist of the plot, but a lot of small nuances are basically just kind of passed over with really quick recollections, so you do lose some depth in the story. Hopefully, this does get addressed in the remake, although it may not be totally accurate to Illusion Softworks' original vision. If you're familiar with open world games, you can jump into Mafia without much hassle, although it's gonna feel more like Grand Theft Auto 3 than Grand Theft Auto 5. You control Tommy from a second-person view on foot and third-person by default while driving. I didn't mod my game aside from widescreen resolution and soundtrack restoration, so I could really only change the camera when I was driving. I would have liked to change it on foot, but I know it kinda makes sense to have it stay in second-person view, especially for the gunfights. Gameplay-wise, it's pretty standard fare for action crime games. You shoot things with guns, hit things with melee weapons, and drive however you like, provided that the police don't see you. Now, if there's one thing that annoyed me with Mafia's driving system, it is the police AI. Early on in the game, it's heavily implied that you should just leave the speed limiter on unless you need to rush to your objective. because if a cop sees you, you're getting chased down for speeding. Run a red light? That's totally fine 99% of the time. Scrape against another car or bump into them slightly? No problem. Go 65 miles in a 60 zone? You're going to the station, buster. It is beyond frustrating to be moving to an objective across town with your limiter off and then you're being chased by police all of a sudden. You can't even start the mission like you could with other games. You have to lose the cops first. It's realistic, but goddamn if it isn't annoying being attacked or arrested and having to repeat the drive again and again. Just drive with the limiter on unless you're playing free mode. Just do it. As I said before, the progression of Mafia City of Lost Heaven is fairly linear. You move from your home area of Salieri's bar to your mission objective, clear whatever it is you're trying to do, and make it back without dying or bringing back some kind of trouble. While all of this is going on, you're having to constantly toggle the map on and off to figure out where the hell you are and where you're going, which actually is not an issue with the console port, funny enough. It doesn't deviate much from that unless you want to steal some fancy cars for your mechanic pal Lucas Bertoni. Even then, you could just go through the story completely and come back to unlock them for free mode, as the game does have autosaves for each checkpoint of every mission. It's a concept I really like, especially if you want to replay some missions you enjoyed, or in my case, get more game footage. The missions might be linear, but that doesn't mean the gameplay itself is linear. You're given an objective to fulfill and you can clear it in any way possible. You can take different paths to either speed right through the mission or hunker down and endure some gunfire to stay alive. You could also try to beat up everybody with your fists, but honestly that never works out. The missions aren't all the same either. You could be fighting gangsters at the dockyard or trying to solve a problem disguised as a sailor. The variety is nice, although I do find that controlling Tommy can be quite stiff. You'll run into issues where you unload a massive amount of bullets and get some awesome headshots, but the enemy AI is still alive somehow. I've also noticed that switching between guns can be a bit odd, especially if you want to swap between two larger weapons like a Thompson and a shotgun. The inventory management could have been a bit easier to use, especially since you can pause and look at what you have. There are some parts of the game that really don't feel very realistic. There's some aspects done well, like the police AI, but you move and jump around like you just discovered what your limbs are, and some of the model animations have really not aged well at all. There's also been more than one moment in my playthrough where I die from things I couldn't even see, or the AI would turn into like a perfect sharpshooter and kill me with 3 gunshots. The difficulty is a good challenge, but is it inherently fair? I'm not sure. I can't end the discussion on gameplay without bringing up Free Ride. Essentially, it's like a mini Grand Theft Auto sandbox with different modifiers to change the AI of Lost Heaven. You're able to move between the city and country, day or night, and use anything at your disposal, including all the cars you unlock during the main game and weapons too. The objective is to stay alive and live freely by causing mayhem throughout Lost Heaven. You can get money by killing rival gangsters, driving cat bears around town, blowing up cars, or even maintaining high speeds on the roads. It's nice that Illusion Softworks at least recognizes that Mafia is a pseudo GTA clone and added the option to explore the city once more. The PC version also includes Free Ride Extreme, which lets you unlock prototype cars that you can use in free mode. They range from the super cool racing cars you find in the main campaign to the sights and smells of the Flower Power Mobile. It can get pretty wacky in Free Ride, but that's what makes it fun. Overall, Mafia's gameplay is fun, but expect some clunkiness. As you move around Lost Heaven, you'll get to take in the sights and sounds of the city. It's based on Chicago and other Midwest cityscapes in the 1930s, so there's a nice mix of densely packed city streets, bustling neighborhoods, and quiet suburbs and countrysides. Like the police, the citizens of Lost Heaven also do what they want. Some cars might even break traffic laws just like you, although maybe not as extremely. It may not turn as many heads in 2020, but for a 2002 release, you gotta appreciate the efforts from Illusion Softworks. Their efforts are more apparent with other aspects of the visual style, like the cutscenes rendering within the game engine and not slowing down much, if at all. As the game progresses through the 8-year span of Tommy's story, different areas of the city will begin to open up and change. I didn't notice this at first, but I was made more aware from online posts and videos like Mini-Me's analysis of Mafia, who I'm pretty sure has a clone of my brain and just reviews everything I want to review. Am I jealous? Maybe a little bit. Unfortunately, because of the way Mafia's story is structured, you feel more inclined to make it through a mission and get back to Salieri's without dying. It means you're less likely to stop and take in the sights, at least from my experience. Maybe I just need to stop and smell the roses more often. In any case, it's another element of Mafia 1 that makes it feel less stiff and empty, which is always a better choice. The Mafia games have always featured some pretty good sound direction, from realistic car and gun sounds to accurate time period soundtracks. One of my favorite elements of the Mafia series is the licensed soundtrack. Mafia 2 features tracks from the big band music of the late 1930s to the early rock of the 1960s, with Mafia 3 leaning harder into the 60s and 70s, with maybe too much Creedence Clearwater Revival, but we can talk about that in another video. Mafia 1, I find, is maybe a bit more barren with their soundtrack. Could be a music licensing issue that would come back to haunt them later, but there's really not a lot to listen to when you drive around Lost Heaven. Each area of the city has its own song that plays on loop, and it only changes once you move between areas. So unless you're really into free mode, you're probably going to hear Cavalry from Django Reinhardt every time you start a mission from Salieri's, Chinatown from the Mill Brothers if you decide to pass through, you guessed it, Chinatown. Or, for those of you very familiar with the Mafia 2 soundtrack, the music is good, but it gets stuck in your head, and not always in a good way. I do hope these songs stay in Hangar 13's remake, but maybe with more variety. I will say that Vladimir Simunik's original score for Mafia is pretty damn good. It gives the cutscenes a lot of drama and intensity, especially when the voice acting is, not so good.
I hope I still recognize him.
Another aspect of Mafia 1 that's pretty good is the sound effect design. A lot of the sound design is faithful to the time period. You've got terrible sounding motor engines, police whistles, streetcar bells, jarring horns, and very tinny radio music. Other sounds like gunfire and footsteps are done well, and you're not going to view it as inaccurate unless your knowledge of Foley and time period sound design goes way beyond general knowledge. I think the only thing that stuck out to me was the dial tone from the telephone in a cutscene, because I didn't really expect that to be a thing in 1930s America, and what I found out is it's more of like a direction choice. You might also find that some sounds are a bit more low fidelity due to storage limits in early 2000s PC games, but the sound team does a good enough job of mixing sound effects with ambience and music so that you're not going to notice it all the time. With maybe the exception being the voice acting.
In that case, welcome to the family, Tommy. You've passed the first test.
It's an honor, sir.
And now we've got a new member.
So we've talked about how Illusion Softworks really pushed game design principles to their limits to see how accurately they could tell a Mafia story. But was it received well, and what happened afterwards? Well, there's gotta be a reason we have 2 sequels and a remake on the way. The PC version ranked quite well with both critics and consumers, achieving excellent review scores to average out around 88% on Metacritic. The console ports didn't do so well. Lower resolution visuals and longer load times were a big issue. Mafia 1 did do pretty well sales-wise, with 2 million units sold by 2008. It was also determined through a fan poll to be one of the best games ever developed in the Czech Republic. It did so well in Europe that it even managed to get a special edition released in Germany with only 5,000 copies sold as a limited release. I don't really buy physical PC games, but that looks really tempting. Now remember how I said the game was published by Gathering of Developers? Well, when Mafia was released, they were owned by Take-Two Interactive, the owners of 2K Games and Rockstar Games. They were bought out in May 2000, and their offices had moved to Take-Two headquarters in August of 2001. Obviously, with the success of Mafia 1, a sequel developed by Illusion Softworks was greenlit and slated for a 2008 release. However, in January of 2008, Take-Two would purchase Illusion Softworks and rebrand the studio as 2K Czech. It's unclear how this might have changed Mafia 2's development, but Mafia 1 and 2 head writer Daniel Vavra would leave 2K in 2009, apparently not having worked on the game for a few years, and Mafia 2 would be delayed until August of 2010. So there probably was a bit of weirdness we didn't really know about. In any case, 2K Czech would be closed in 2014, with Mafia 3's development moved to Hangar 13, and most of the 2K Czech staff merged into that studio. So we may see staff from the original game filling roles in the remake, although Daniel Vavra is not so hopeful that it's gonna do well. Guess we'll have to wait and see. Mafia, the City of Lost Heaven is an interesting experiment. It's an American mafia story told through the lens of a Czech game studio, and tries its best to capture the essence of the time period, as well as the grandeur and suspense of mafia films. Protagonist Tommy Angelo is presented as having his moral compass being constantly broken and fixed over and over again. His involvement in organized crime only escalates as the story moves, through the 1930s. It's excellently produced for a 2002 release, but it's showing some age 18 years later. For all the realism you see in the world building, you might still experience some clunkiness and annoyances with the gameplay. That doesn't mean it's all bad though, and it does have qualities that shine through even today. Now, could it have been more? Maybe so, but it was really well done, and it does serve as a good base story for Hangar 13 to expand and make into a modern masterpiece, with a gripping tale supported by a backdrop of fun gameplay, impressive visuals, and more music. Either that, or you can just go mod the original and play on the Titanic. It's really up to you. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. I think you should probably stick around if you like this video and subscribe, because I'm planning on reviewing Mafia Definitive Edition as well as more crime games. I'll make sure to link everything once it's all released, but with that said, I'm FalseProof, and I'll see you later. Bye.